Katerina was just a whisper of a girl, small for her 10 years, carrying the vast, heavy stillness of a secret that outweighed her entire body. And the moment the heavy latch on the front door clicked shut, signifying the arrival of her father, Marcus, the air in the house didn't just change, it became a thick, viscous thing, slowing down time and hardening her heart into a desperate, protective knot, a feeling that clawed at the back of her throat and settled like ice in the deepest part of her stomach, warning her without words that the true version of her home, the one only she truly lived in, had just begun its nightly shift, transforming from a brightly lit stage of mundane family life into a confined, softly lit tunnel of dread, where every shadow moved and every silence spoke volumes of unspoken rules and terrifying possibilities. The rest of the world saw Marcus, a man with a wide, easy smile and hands that were quick to fix a broken shelf or throw a softball, a provider whose voice boomed with confidence and whose presence was described as strong and reliable. No, but Katerina knew the other Marcus, the one who didn't smile with his eyes, the one whose touch was never warm, whose movements were precise and private, and whose voice dropped to a low, murmuring register that seemed to detach itself from the sound of the house, a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly into the nervous system, a siren of panic that only she could hear, leaving her paralyzed and trying desperately to make herself disappear into the background noise of the television or the rhythmic ticking of the kitchen clock. But nothing worked, because his focus, once narrowed, was inescapable, a terrifying spotlight that pinned her in place. She had learned the art of stillness with a proficiency that worried her teacher, who mistook it for shyness, and her mother, Sarah, who saw it as her quiet nature. But it was not shyness, it was survival, a calculated attempt to occupy as little space as possible in the hopes that if she were small enough, invisible enough, the heavy, demanding presence would sweep past her and find no purchase. But it never did. And there were the times, the special moments, as he called them, with a forced, cloying affection that made her skin crawl when he would call her name from the hall. A soft, almost tender sound that was more frightening than a shout, signaling that the ritual, the private, suffocating interaction in the quiet of her room or the shadowed corner of the downstairs den was about to begin. And in those moments, the world shrank to the size of her rapidly beating heart, and all she could do was obey, her mind already retreating behind a thick, frosted pane of glass, leaving her body to navigate the terrifying necessity of compliance, a necessity born from the chilling understanding that resistance brought a different kind of darkness, a harsher consequence that she had learned through painful, unforgettable lessons, was far worse than the silence she now maintained. The secret was a living, breathing thing inside her, a massive, crushing weight of knowledge that she carried alone. Every glance she stole at her mother, Sarah, who was folding laundry or humming along to the radio, felt like a betrayal. And the question of telling, the terrifying revolutionary idea of speaking the truth aloud, was a constant, agonizing internal battle that raged silently behind her wide, watchful eyes, because the fear wasn't just of Marcus's retribution, the deep, retaliatory chill that he threatened would follow any disclosure. The greater, more paralyzing fear was the absolute certainty that if she told Sarah, her mother, the woman who was her entire sun and moon, Sarah wouldn't believe her, or worse, she would believe her and the world would end, shattering into a million pieces of broken glass that couldn't be put back together. And it would all be her fault, the child's fault, for breaking the illusion of the perfect family, for disrupting the fragile, hard-won peace that her mother maintained with a relentless, weary effort. So she kept the silence, hugging the painful truth closer, letting it consume her from the inside out until she felt like a hollow shell of the vibrant, laughing girl she sometimes remembered being in a far-off, impossible past. Her performance of normalcy was impeccable. She ate dinner, though every bite tasted like ash. She did her homework, though the words blurred and swam on the page, and she even managed a small, tired smile for Sarah, who looked back with concern and often asked, "Are you feeling okay, sweetie? You look a little pale." A question that sent a spike of panic through Katerina, because it meant Sarah was seeing too much, peering past the facade. But the question was always followed by an easy, dismissive answer from Marcus. "She's just growing fast, needs more sleep." And the moment passed, the spotlight swung away, and Katerina was safe again. until the next time and the next, and the cycle of dread and temporary reprieve began to wear away at her health, leaving her with chronic stomachaches, an inability to sleep through the night without waking up in a cold sweat, screaming silently into her pillow, and an almost physical repulsion from touch, even the innocent, loving touch of her mother, a reaction that Sarah noticed but attributed to the confusing, moody hormones of pre-adolescence. Another mistake in judgment that was fueled by the deep, ingrained trust she placed in the man she had married, the supposed foundation of their home, the man who was systematically dismantling her daughter's soul piece by terrifying peace. The house itself became a landscape of fear, the long hallway outside her bedroom, a gauntlet she dreaded crossing after sunset, the sound of the television from the living room, a misleading comfort, and the scent of Marcus's sharp, masculine cologne, a trigger that could send her heart racing from one floor away, an invisible alarm that screamed danger louder than any siren, and her internal trauma began to manifest externally in small, telltale ways, though they were easily missed by an unsuspecting eye. She stopped making eye contact, her shoulders permanently rounded as if warding off a blow that was always imminent, and she developed a nervous tic, constantly wringing her hands together until the skin was raw and chapped, a frantic, unconscious effort to clean herself of an invisible grime that she felt permeated her entire being after the heavy, dark interactions that left her feeling cold and violated, a feeling of deep contamination that no amount of scrubbing could wash away. And she retreated further into a world of her own making, spending hours drawing cryptic, dark pictures of small, trapped birds and looming, faceless giants, a silent, desperate communication of her pain that no one was listening to, reinforcing the chilling isolation of her ordeal, the realization that she was entirely alone in this silent, terrifying war waged within the walls of her own home. One ordinary Tuesday evening, the routine that had been her shield finally failed her, not because she chose to break it, but because the unbearable physical pain that followed the last, most invasive, special moment was too intense to mask, and the catalyst was something as mundane and loving as a bath. Sarah called her into the bathroom, the water steaming invitingly, filled with bubble bath and the promise of warmth and comfort. But as Katerina stepped gingerly into the tub, the warm water, instead of soothing her, intensified the acute tenderness she felt, making her gasp sharply, a sudden involuntary sound that was closer to a suppressed cry than a mere complaint, and she instinctively clutched at her side, her face momentarily contorting with a pain she couldn't hide, and she sank quickly into the water, trying to hide her body, her face now pale and wet with the steam and the sudden terror of exposure, the panic that she had given away too much, that the dam of her secrecy had sprung a leak. Sarah, her mind still preoccupied with the day's tasks and the list of groceries she needed, initially dismissed it. "Careful, sweetie, don't slip. Did you bump your hip earlier?" But as she began to gently wash Katerina's back, her hand, usually so warm and familiar, brushed over a point of acute hidden soreness, causing Katerina to flinch violently, pulling away with a speed and intensity that was far beyond the typical protest of a child who hates being washed. And it was in that moment, in the steam-filled, brightly lit room, that Sarah finally saw it. Not just the physical reaction, but the deep, wide-eyed terror in her daughter's gaze, the look of a wild animal cornered and expecting a blow, a look that didn't belong on a child's face, especially not a child being cared for by her mother, and the sight sent a sickening, ice-cold realization flooding into Sarah's mind, a terrible certainty that bypassed logic and landed directly as a visceral blow to her gut, a realization that everything she thought she knew about her family, her husband, and her daughter's quiet demeanor was a lie built on a foundation of unthinkable fear, and the protective, almost animalistic maternal instinct that had been dormant for so long finally roared to life, replacing confusion with a razor-sharp, focused clarity. Sarah didn't push, didn't ask questions that could be answered with a denial. She simply finished the bath with meticulous, gentle care, her touch now feather-light, her voice steady, but her mind racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, piecing together fragments she had previously ignored. The late-night sound of Marcus's footsteps in the hall when he said he was getting water, the way Katerina would immediately shrink and become rigid whenever he entered a room, the way her daughter would avoid her father's eyes but watch him constantly from the periphery, a silent, terrified surveillance, and the painful, gut-wrenching memory of the way Katerina had flinched just now. A reaction that was not just pain, but a desperate, learned avoidance of touch. And she knew, with a certainty that made her physically tremble, that her daughter was suffering in a way that she, her mother, had failed to see, that she had allowed through willful blindness and misplaced trust, and the guilt was a crushing physical weight, but it was immediately channeled into action, focused, terrifyingly calm action, realizing that she had to act with absolute caution and secrecy to protect her daughter from the man who was currently sitting in the living room, reading the paper, the man who was both her husband and the predator lurking in their home. She kept her composure, put Katerina to bed with extra cuddles and quiet reassurance, never once mentioning the flinch, never once asking the damning question, instead only reinforcing her love and her promise to be there, a promise that now felt hollow given her past failures, but which she vowed, silently, fiercely, to make up for tenfold. And then, waiting until the late hours when Marcus was asleep, she did what she had to do, her hands shaking as she pulled out her phone, moving with a ghost silence, gathering the courage and resolve that only a mother protecting her young can summon. Making a call not to the police immediately, knowing the abrupt chaos could terrify Katerina further, but to a close, trusted friend who was a social worker, speaking in hushed, careful whispers, using vague, horrifying code words to describe the pattern of her husband's behaviors and Katerina's symptoms, establishing a plan that prioritized her daughter's safety and protection above all else, including the fragile remnants of her own shattered life and marriage, understanding in that terrible, still hour that her life was over, but her daughter's was just beginning, and she had to be the one to ensure it began safely. The next day, the plan was put into motion with a deceptive simplicity. Sarah told Marcus she needed to take Katerina to the dentist for an emergency appointment about a persistent toothache, a lie so mundane it slipped past his suspicion easily, and as soon as they were safely away from the house, in the car, on the highway, a distance separating them from the danger, Sarah drove them directly to the pre-arranged meeting place, a safe, neutral ground where the social worker and a gentle, compassionate detective were waiting. And only then, in the safety of a room filled with understanding, patient faces, did Sarah turn to her daughter, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces as she gently knelt, looking into Katerina's fearful eyes, not asking for details, but simply stating the truth she now knew. "I believe you, my love. I know you've been so brave and you don't have to carry that secret anymore. I promise you he will never, ever hurt you again, and I am here." And in that moment the dam broke, not with loud sobs, but with a quiet, endless weeping that seemed to drain years of terror from Katerina's small body. A quiet release that spoke volumes of the trauma she had endured, but also carried the first, faint sound of hope, the promise of a future where the darkness did not reach her. And later the detective, armed with Sarah's carefully constructed details and the heartbreaking, whispered confirmations from Katerina, confirmed what Sarah already knew. Marcus was gone, taken into custody with no resistance, the weight of his own monstrous actions finally catching up to him, leaving behind a silence in the house that was no longer terrifying, but simply empty, waiting to be filled with light. The aftermath was a period of slow, careful rebuilding, a time marked by soft voices, endless patience, and the slow, arduous work of healing the invisible wounds that ran deeper than any cut or bruise. Sarah found them a small apartment miles away, a place that held no memories of the shadow, a place where Katerina could feel truly safe, and they began the long journey of therapy, a gentle process where Katerina learned to externalize the giant, looming figure of her fear, to speak the unspeakable, not with rage, but with the quiet, measured voice of a survivor beginning to reclaim her narrative, and Sarah was relentless in her support, a constant, unwavering presence, recognizing that her trust had been a shield for a monster, and now her sole purpose was to be a shield for her daughter, the best kind of shield, one made of unconditional love and fierce protection, a mother who would never look away again, and the nightmares didn't disappear overnight, nor did the flinching, but slowly, miraculously. The tension began to leave Katerina's small shoulders. Her hands stopped their constant, frantic wringing, and the pale, drawn look was replaced by the faint, lovely blush of health, the first fragile bloom of recovery. Years passed, bringing with them a steady procession of sunrises and ordinary safe days, and the shadow of Marcus became what it should have always been, a dark, distant memory with no power, a chapter that had closed forever with the certainty of iron bars and justice. And Katerina, now a young woman, was the living embodiment of a happy ending that had been fought for, earned through tears and strength, a quiet testament to the resilience of the human spirit. She was vibrant, articulate, and though the trauma remained a part of her story, a scar that reminded her of her strength, it no longer defined her, and she excelled in her studies, found passion in art, painting canvases filled with bright, uncompromising colors that seemed to deliberately banish all shades of gray and black, and she never stopped holding Sarah's hand, a connection that now symbolized trust restored and a bond forged in fire, a reminder that they had faced the deepest darkness together and emerged into the light. And one sunny afternoon, while sitting in a park, laughing easily as she watched children play, Katerina felt a lightness she hadn't known was possible, a genuine, unburdened joy that was entirely her own, a feeling that whispered, "You are free. You are safe. You survived." A powerful, quiet victory for the girl who had almost been destroyed by the silence, now living a life loud with hope, love, and the beautiful, uncompromising sound of her own voice.